There is a silence that comes only when the mind stops asking, "Who am I?" and begins to simply be. The illusion of self is the heaviest chain we carry, the quiet architect of all our fears, our pride, our endless grasping. We spend our lives protecting an image that never truly existed, building walls around a phantom. But imagine a night where you let go of the need to be someone. Imagine breathing without the weight of identity, without the noise of comparison, without the constant pressure to become. In that space, there is a freedom so vast, it feels like floating in the sky. The Buddha called it the realization of non-self vienenth, the key to liberation from all suffering. As you listen tonight, let each word be a gentle wind dissolving the boundaries of me and mine. Let the mind rest, open, infinite. You are not the story you tell yourself, not the roles you play, not the face in the mirror. You are awareness itself, boundless, peaceful, free. Stay, breathe, and let this truth cradle you into sleep. Subscribe to Buddhism for sleep and continue awakening through stillness. In the beginning of every human story lies the quiet birth of an illusion. From the moment we take our first breath, the world begins whispering to us who we are supposed to be. Our parents call us by a name, society shapes our reflection, and our mind, eager to belong, begins to weave a web around these fragments, calling it me. It feels real because it has boundaries, because it can be touched and recognized, but like a mirage shimmering on hot sand. The self disappears the moment we try to grasp it. We are taught to chase identity, to build ourselves around possessions, relationships, status, and beliefs. Every success becomes a brick in the fortress of I, and every failure, a crack that threatens to expose the emptiness beneath. We cling to opinions, emotions, and stories as if they were the essence of existence. But beneath all that noise lies something simpler, something infinitely more peaceful. The Buddha saw that what we call the self is merely a collection of changing elements: body, feelings, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness. None of these remain constant from moment to moment. Like clouds drifting across the sky, they arise and fade without a center to anchor them. Yet, we hold onto them with desperate hands, terrified that without this illusion, we would be nothing. The fear of emptiness is what keeps the cycle of suffering alive. We confuse impermanence with loss and change with death, not realizing that the one who fears, the one who clings, is itself an illusion. The mind, in its ignorance, constructs a continuous narrative to make sense of the ever-shifting flow of experience. It tells us that there is a thinker behind every thought, a doer behind every action, and a dreamer behind every dream. But when we look deeply, we find no thinker apart from thought, no doer apart from action. The story of I is stitched together from memory, desire, and habit, all of which dissolve the moment we stop feeding them. Still, this illusion of self feels comforting. It gives structure to chaos, purpose to existence, and meaning to suffering. We identify with our name, our body, our emotions, believing they define us. When someone praises us, we swell with pride. When they criticize us, we shrink in pain. Yet what are they really touching? A shifting bundle of sensations, a stream of consciousness that never stops moving. We chase validation from others to keep this fragile construct alive, but like feeding smoke, the more we grasp, the more it slips through our fingers. Imagine watching a river and trying to point to where it truly begins or ends. The moment you name one drop as the source, another takes its place. The self operates the same way. It cannot be found because it never stands still. In every thought, emotion, and breath, the I dies and is born again, yet we insist it is permanent. The Buddha compared it to a flame seemingly continuous, yet dependent on constant fuel. When the fuel of craving, ignorance, and attachment is exhausted, the flame naturally fades, revealing peace beyond identity. This is not annihilation, but awakening. It is the realization that we are not what we thought we were. Still, to the ordinary mind, the idea of no self feels threatening, like stepping into a void. Our culture worships individuality, encourages us to define ourselves, to stand out, to fight for our uniqueness. But this pursuit, though it promises freedom, often deepens our bondage. The more we try to be someone, the farther we drift from what we truly are. True freedom begins when we dare to question the I we protect so fiercely. Who is the one feeling hurt? Who is the one chasing happiness? Who is the one afraid of letting go? When we inquire deeply, we find nothing solid to hold on to. The answers dissolve into awareness itself. What remains is not emptiness in the sense of absence, but spaciousness, the vast, open sky of being that holds all clouds of experience without resistance. Within that space, suffering has no foothold. To glimpse this truth, we must slow down and observe the mind as it fabricates identity moment by moment. Notice how quickly we say, I am angry, I am sad, I am happy, as if emotions were possessions. But where is this I that owns them? Can you locate it in the body, in thought, in sensation? The more we look, the more it slips away, revealing a mystery so deep it can only be lived, not understood. This inquiry is not meant to destroy the personality, but to liberate us from identifying with it. The self still functions as a tool for communication and survival, but when seen through, it loses its tyranny. We no longer need to defend it or prove it. We act, speak, and feel naturally, without the burden of me and mine. This is the beginning of peace. Imagine a lotus flower opening in still water, untouched by the mud beneath. That stillness is the essence of VNN, the recognition that there is no separate self to protect, no inner fortress to maintain. Life continues, but without the friction of resistance. Joy arises effortlessly because there is no one clinging to it. Pain passes softly because there is no one taking it personally. Every breath becomes a reminder of impermanence, every moment a window into freedom. When we begin to live this way, even for a few seconds, the world feels lighter. The boundaries between self and other blur, compassion blooms naturally, and fear begins to fade. We see that all beings are waves of the same ocean, rising and falling together. The illusion of separation dissolves, and what remains is unity, stillness, and infinite love. This is the quiet beginning of the path toward awakening, the moment we stop seeking to become someone and start remembering that we have never been anything other than pure awareness. The construction of the self is one of the most intricate illusions the mind has ever created. It begins subtly, not as something we consciously choose, but as a pattern of thought that forms through repetition. The child hears its name and learns to respond, feeling a small spark of recognition that soon becomes attachment. Every moment of attention, praise, or rejection builds another layer around this fragile sense of identity. Like a spider weaving its web, the mind spins thought after thought, belief after belief, until the web feels like home. Yet the home is empty, and the spider itself is nothing but the movement of the web. The sense of I is born from this constant weaving of experience, memory, and imagination. The mind wants continuity. a thread that connects yesterday's story to today's and tomorrow's. Without it, life feels disorienting, meaningless. So we construct a narrator who claims ownership over the flow of experience. We say, I am thinking, I am walking, I am living, as if there were a permanent entity behind each action. But the Buddha's insight was that these actions happen by themselves. They arise out of conditions, unfold according to causes, and vanish when those causes change. The thought I am is simply another thought, arising and passing like a wave. The one who thinks it is not separate from it. When we begin to observe this process carefully, we realize that the self is not a thing but a verb. It is the ongoing act of identifying, naming, comparing, and grasping. It does not exist apart from these movements. If they stop, even for a moment, the self vanishes. This is why meditation feels both liberating and frightening to those who begin to glimpse stillness. When the chatter of thought quiets, the familiar sense of I dissolves, and the mind panics. It feels like dying because the structure that held our world together begins to crumble. But beyond that moment of fear lies a vast peace, the peace of not needing to be someone. The mind, however, resists this realization. It rushes back to rebuild the story, to reclaim identity through memory and preference. It says, this is who I am. This is what I believe. This is what I like and hate. It does this endlessly because the illusion of self needs constant maintenance. It cannot survive stillness. It must keep moving to feel real. This is why the Buddha called ignorance a wheel constantly spinning, powered by craving and aversion. Every desire to become or to avoid something reinforces the illusion. The self feeds on resistance, on the friction between what is and what should be. Without that tension, it fades. If you sit quietly and look inward, you can observe how the mind fabricates identity in real time. A thought arises. I am tired, I am bored, I am enlightened. Each one attempts to anchor experience to a fictional center. But the moment you look for that center, it cannot be found. It is like trying to see your own eyes without a mirror. The more you search, the clearer the emptiness becomes. And in that emptiness, there is no lack. It is full of awareness, alive and radiant. Yet most people never rest in that awareness because the ego, fearing its own end, distracts them. It pulls them toward pleasure, achievement, and recognition. It whispers that freedom lies in perfecting the self rather than transcending it. So the world keeps spinning, filled with people chasing reflections, polishing masks, decorating cages. But true freedom begins with seeing that the cage door was never locked. The bars were made of thought, the key hidden in awareness itself. To see this truth, we must understand how the mind attaches to form. Every sensation, every thought, every experience becomes fuel for the ego when it is labeled mine. The body, for instance, changes constantly. Yet we call it me. The mind produces thoughts automatically, yet we claim ownership of them. This illusion of possession is the glue that binds the false self. The Buddha taught that clinging to these aggregates the body, feelings, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness creates suffering. Not because these things are bad, but because they are impermanent. To cling to what changes is to live in fear. To identify with what decays is to die a little every moment. But when we see their impermanence clearly, the grip of identity loosens. We begin to experience life not as my life, but as the movement of life itself. It is like watching a river flow and realizing we are not the water, but the space through which it moves. The current still runs, the waves still dance, but there is no swimmer trying to control them. This recognition is not intellectual. It is a shift in perception, a quiet turning of the mind toward its own source. It comes through awareness, through seeing clearly what is happening without judgment. When a thought arises, we see it as just a thought. When an emotion burns, we witness it as energy passing through. The more deeply we observe, the more transparent the self becomes. It was never solid to begin with. In truth, everything we call I is made of borrowed parts. Our genes, our culture, our memories, all of them inherited. Even our desires are echoes of the world around us. So what remains when all of that is seen through? Not nothingness, but clarity. The luminous stillness that was always here, waiting beneath the noise. In that space, compassion naturally arises because the boundary between self and other dissolves. The pain of others feels like our own, and kindness flows effortlessly. We no longer act from the small self that wants to gain or protect, but from the vast awareness that seeks nothing. This is the beginning of awakening. The mind that once built walls now opens like a sky after rain. Each moment becomes a mirror reflecting the dance of impermanence. We see thoughts as ripples, emotions as clouds, the body as a temporary vessel. Nothing to grasp, nothing to fear. In this recognition, we find the deepest rest. But the journey does not end here. Seeing through the illusion of self intellectually is only the first step. To live it requires practice, surrender, and trust. The ego will return again and again, wearing new masks, spiritual pride, subtle fear, hidden desire. It will say, I am the one who understands no self, creating another identity to cling to. Yet with awareness, even this trick is seen for what it is, another ripple in the endless ocean. The practice, then, is not to destroy the self, but to stop believing in its permanence, to let it arise and pass like everything else. When we live this way, we no longer fear death, for we have already seen that there is no one to die. Life becomes lighter, like a song without a singer, flowing through us instead of from us. And in that flow, there is an exquisite simplicity. Breathing happens, seeing happens, loving happens. The universe moves, and we move with it, not as separate beings, but as expressions of one boundless life. This is the heart of the Buddha's insight. The self is a story told by the mind. And when the story ends, what remains is peace. Suffering begins the moment the illusion of self collides with reality, because realities change, and the self demands permanence. The more tightly we hold to the idea of who we are, the more painful it becomes when life moves in directions we did not choose. Every loss, every disappointment, every moment of fear is rooted in resistance to impermanence. We say, this should not have happened to me, this is not who I am, this is not my plan, and in that very thought, the wall of separation between what is and what we wish it to be becomes the birthplace of suffering. The self is always trying to control life, to shape it according to desire and fear, to maintain an identity that feels safe and recognizable. But life refuses to be contained. It changes form constantly, like water, and when we try to grasp it, it slips through our fingers. This is why the Buddha taught that clinging is the cause of dukkha, the fundamental dissatisfaction of existence. It is not that the world is cruel, but that our insistence on permanence blinds us to its natural flow. The mind, believing in a solid I, interprets every change as a personal threat. When someone we love leaves, we feel abandoned. When we fail, we feel worthless. When we age, we feel diminished. Yet beneath these reactions lies a deeper truth. What we are mourning is the loss of the story of ourselves. The experience passes, but the ego interprets it as an attack on its survival. It whispers, "You are less now. You have failed. You have been forgotten." And so suffering multiplies, not because of reality itself, but because of the story we attach to it. When we examine this closely, we begin to see that the self thrives on conflict. It defines itself in opposition to others, through comparison, through struggle. Without contrast, it cannot exist. This is why, even in times of peace, the ego creates subtle problems to keep itself alive. It judges, it worries, it plans endlessly. It needs tension to sustain its narrative. But awareness has no such need. Awareness simply sees. It witnesses joy and sorrow with equal clarity. When awareness awakens, it is like light entering a dark room. The shadows of identity begin to fade, revealing that the suffering we thought was personal was never personal at all. It was the natural consequence of confusion. Imagine holding onto a rope that is burning at both ends, refusing to let go because you believe it defines you. The tighter you grip, the more it hurts, yet the mind insists, "If I release it, I will lose myself." But in truth, letting go is the only act that sets you free. This is the essence of the Buddha's teaching. Suffering ends not when the world changes, but when our relationship to it does. To see this clearly, we must observe how attachment operates in everyday life. When we desire something, we create an image of fulfillment. The mind says, "When I have this, I will be happy." But happiness tied to a condition is fragile. The moment that condition changes, joy turns to fear of loss. The self oscillates endlessly between craving and aversion, never at rest, because it believes peace lies outside itself. Yet the Buddha pointed directly to the opposite. Peace is found when we stop searching, when we stop clinging to desire and aversion altogether. The cycle of craving is like a wheel that spins faster the more we chase. Each fulfilled desire gives temporary relief, but also strengthens the illusion that happiness depends on external things. In this way, even pleasure becomes a subtle form of bondage. The ego feeds on it, saying, "This is who I am, this is what makes me happy," and in doing so, it builds another wall between itself and the infinite. To understand suffering deeply is to see that there is no sufferer apart from the process of suffering itself. Pain arises, sensation moves, thought comments, emotion swells. We call that combination my suffering. But when awareness separates from identification, when we observe pain without ownership, something profound happens. The pain is still there, but the burden is gone. It is like watching rain fall without trying to stop it. There is clarity, tenderness, and space. The mind no longer says, "This should not be," it simply sees. In that seeing, suffering loses its roots. The story of "I am in pain" dissolves, and what remains is just the pure experience of being alive. Even sorrow becomes sacred when it is not filtered through the ego's demands. This is why great teachers often smile, even in adversity. They have seen through the illusion that anything could truly harm what they are. The self can be wounded, insulted, forgotten, but awareness cannot. It is untouched, unbroken, infinite. It is the sky behind every storm. Yet this realization does not make one cold or indifferent. On the contrary, it opens the heart. When we stop defending the illusion of me, we begin to feel the world's suffering as our own, not through pity, but through unity. Compassion arises naturally, like fragrance from a flower. We act kindly not because we must, but because separation no longer makes sense. The pain of another is no longer outside of us. This is the paradox of no self. When we let go of the I, love expands infinitely. The ego says, if I dissolve, I will lose everything. But the truth is, when the I dissolves, we gain the whole world. Life flows effortlessly through an open heart, unresisted, unpossessed. There is joy in every breath, even in tears. There is a quiet song beneath all experience that whispers, this too is freedom. To live from this understanding requires constant remembrance. The ego will return, disguised as thought, as emotion, as judgment. It will tell you that you have lost your center, that you must fix, achieve, or protect something. But if you pause, breathe, and observe, you will see it as just another wave rising in the ocean of awareness. No wave can drown the ocean. Every emotion, every fear, every thought, no matter how strong, is temporary. And when you know this not as a belief but as a lived truth, suffering loses its power. You no longer fight with life. You dance with it. Even pain becomes a teacher, pointing back to the place within that cannot be shaken. This is the middle way, not denial, not indulgence, but understanding. The Buddha walked this path and invited us to walk it too, not as disciples but as explorers of our own mind. Each time you notice the pull of desire or the sting of aversion, see it as a doorway. Behind that doorway lies the space of no self, the vastness where clinging cannot survive. The journey of awakening is not about escaping suffering, but transforming our relationship with it. When we stop saying my pain and simply feel, the energy of suffering transforms into wisdom. It becomes compassion, patience, humility. It softens the edges of identity until nothing remains to defend. This is how suffering becomes grace, how the darkest moments reveal the light that was always shining beneath. When you begin to see that the I is not the center of experience, but merely a passing pattern within it, a great stillness emerges. That stillness is not the absence of life, is life itself, unburdened by names. And in that stillness, you realize that freedom was never something to reach, but something you had never left. The fear of losing oneself is one of the most primal instincts of the human mind, an invisible current running beneath every desire, every attachment, every conflict. It is the echo of the ego's deepest insecurity, the quiet whisper that says, if I am not this, then I am nothing. From childhood, we are conditioned to define ourselves through contrast and possession, to be someone, to have something, to belong somewhere. We are praised for achievements, punished for mistakes, shaped by comparisons. Slowly, we internalize the belief that our worth depends on identity, on being distinct and recognized. This belief takes root so deeply that even the idea of letting it go feels like death. When the Buddha spoke of non-self, he was not denying existence, but revealing the illusion of permanence that keeps us bound. Yet to the ordinary mind, the teaching feels terrifying, because the self is the only reality it knows. We cannot imagine being without the familiar sense of I, even though that very I is the source of our suffering. The paradox is that we long for freedom but fear the path that leads to it. The mind clings to its boundaries because they give a sense of control. Without them, it feels lost in an infinite ocean, unable to tell where it begins or ends. But it is precisely in that boundlessness that true peace resides. The fear of losing oneself is the fear of the unknown, and the unknown is life itself. Every moment of change threatens the ego's illusion of stability. When relationships shift, when bodies age, when beliefs crumble, the ego trembles, trying to rebuild its structure. It interprets change as danger because it equates being with continuity. Yet existence is a river, not a statue. To flow with it is to live. To resist is to suffer. The fear of losing oneself arises whenever we are faced with uncertainty, because uncertainty exposes the fragility of the self's story. We do not fear the event itself. We fear the disappearance of the identity we have built around it. When love ends, we do not just mourn the other. We mourn the version of ourselves that existed through that love. When success fades, we do not just lose status. We lose the narrative of who we thought we were. The ego's survival depends on continuity, and so it clings even to pain, preferring familiar suffering over unfamiliar freedom. This is why people remain trapped in roles that limit them, relationships that harm them, patterns that exhaust them. To let go would mean stepping into the space where the I has no anchor, and that emptiness feels unbearable. Yet, if one dares to stay in that emptiness without fleeing, something miraculous happens. The fear dissolves, and in its place arises a vast stillness, a presence untouched by gain or loss. It is as if the ground we feared falling into was in fact the sky. The mind's greatest mistake is believing that it is separate from life, that it must protect itself from the flow of existence. But the self is not an island. It is a wave in the ocean, inseparable from the water that gives it form. To fear dissolution is to forget that we are made of the very thing we dread merging with. The wave fears disappearing into the sea, not realizing it was never anything but the sea expressing itself. In the same way, what we call the self is consciousness taking temporary shape. When that shape changes, nothing is lost. The ocean remains. The problem is not that we have an ego, but that we believe it to be ultimate. The ego has its function. It organizes experience. It helps us navigate the world, but when it becomes the master rather than the servant, it turns into a prison. It resists reality and calls that resistance identity. It says, I am this, I am not that, and in doing so, it limits the infinite potential of being. The Buddha's invitation to see through the illusion of self is not an invitation to erase individuality, but to free it from bondage. When we understand that the self is a process, not a possession, we can live fully without fear. Life moves through us rather than against us. The fear of losing oneself is also the fear of silence. The ego depends on noise, the constant commentary of thought, to affirm its existence. When we sit in stillness, without distraction, that commentary begins to fade, and the ego senses danger. It whispers, do something, think something, be someone. The discomfort that arises in meditation is not from silence itself, but from the ego's resistance to its own disappearance. If we endure that discomfort, if we let the silence expand, we begin to sense a deeper awareness behind the noise, an awareness that does not need identity to exist. That awareness is who we truly are. It cannot be lost because it was never born. It has no boundary, no story, no name. When we rest in it, fear dissolves naturally. This realization does not happen once. It unfolds slowly, through countless moments of letting go. Each time we face fear and choose awareness instead of reaction, the illusion of self weakens. It is like watching mist evaporate under sunlight. The fear of losing oneself is also what fuels the craving for permanence in relationships and possessions. We cling to people, to places, to roles, hoping they will mirror back a stable image of who we are. We want to be needed, remembered, understood. because each reflection reinforces the ego's sense of solidity. But when those reflections change or disappear, we feel as if a part of us has died. This is why loss feels so unbearable, not because something external has changed, but because the identity built around it has collapsed. Yet this collapse is precisely what allows truth to enter. Every heartbreak, every ending, every failure is an invitation to see that what we thought was me is just a temporary formation. The pain of loss is sacred because it reveals impermanence directly. If we can look at that pain without retreating into resistance, it transforms into wisdom. The fear of losing oneself turns into gratitude for the chance to awaken. In that light, even suffering becomes a teacher. It strips away illusions and leaves only what is real. The courage to face this fear is the foundation of the spiritual path. It requires humility, the willingness to not know, to be nothing. But in being nothing, we become everything. This is the paradox that lies at the heart of all liberation. When we stop trying to preserve ourselves, life preserves us in a deeper way. Actions arise naturally from compassion rather than self-interest. Words flow from silence rather than thought. There is no effort to be good or wise, because the source of all goodness and wisdom is already within the space where the self once stood. When the fear of losing oneself subsides, we begin to live in alignment with reality instead of against it. Life becomes effortless, not because it lacks challenges, but because resistance has ended. We see beauty even in impermanence, love even in endings. The tree loses its leaves, and we understand the grace of surrender. The sunset fades, and we feel the eternity behind change. To live without fear of losing oneself is to live as the sky vast open, allowing clouds to come and go without clinging to any. Thoughts, emotions, identities rise and pass, but the sky remains untouched. When we realize that we are that sky, the drama of the clouds no longer terrifies us. We no longer ask, "Who am I?" because the question itself dissolves in presence. Life simply is. The dance continues, but the dancer disappears. What remains is freedom, quiet, luminous, unshakable. And in that freedom, the old fear becomes compassion. We see others trapped in their own illusions of self, fighting to hold together what cannot be held, and we feel tenderness rather than judgment. We recognize our shared humanity, our shared delusion, our shared longing for peace. This recognition softens the world. It turns fear into empathy, separation into connection. To lose oneself is not to die, but to awaken, to see that we were never separate to begin with. The fear of losing oneself is simply the fear of waking from a dream. And when we finally open our eyes, we realize the dream was beautiful, but reality is peace. When the Buddha sat beneath the Bodhi tree, he did not discover something new. He simply saw what had always been true. In the silence of his awakening, he perceived the nature of all things as interdependent, impermanent, and empty of a separate self. The insight of Vieneng, or non-self, was not a philosophical idea, but a direct vision of reality as it is. He saw that what we call a person is merely a combination of ever-changing processes: the body, sensations, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness. These five aggregates, as he taught, arise due to conditions and cease when those conditions change. There is no permanent entity among them, no unchanging core that can be called I. The Buddha's realization was both radical and compassionate, for in seeing that there is no self, he also saw that there is no separation. Every being, every breath, Every movement of life is woven into one vast fabric of interdependence. This insight shattered the roots of craving and fear. Without the illusion of a separate self, there is no one left to protect, no one to compare, no one to fight. Life flows as life, without resistance. This was the Buddha's liberation, and it is the heart of his teaching. To understand Vian is to see that clinging to the idea of I is the cause of suffering. The self is a mirage created by ignorance, and yet this mirage governs our entire existence. We measure success and failure, love and loss, even birth and death, through the lens of selfhood. The Buddha's awakening revealed that when this lens dissolves, suffering dissolves with it. But this truth cannot be grasped intellectually. It must be lived. The mind that tries to understand Vian often turns it into another concept, another belief to hold. Yet belief is still clinging, still the activity of the ego trying to control understanding. The path of awakening is not about believing in non-self, but seeing it directly. It begins with mindfulness, with observing how everything we call me is in constant flux. When we look deeply at the body, we see it as not a fixed thing, but a continuous process of birth and decay. Cells die and regenerate, breath enters and leaves, sensations arise and pass. Nothing stays the same even for a moment. The same is true for feelings and thoughts. Emotions come and go like waves. Perceptions shift like shadows. What we call the mind is a stream of changing moments, each arising from conditions and vanishing into silence. There is no thinker behind thoughts, no owner of feelings, only the flow itself. This is what the Buddha saw with perfect clarity. Everything that arises is dependently originated. Nothing exists independently. Everything is a relationship. To say I is to ignore the web of causes that sustain existence. The food we eat, the air we breathe, the sunlight that nourishes us, the language we speak will come from countless sources. The self is not an isolated island, but a meeting point of infinite conditions. To see this is to awaken compassion, for when we understand that nothing exists separately, we realize that harming another is harming ourselves. The boundaries of self and other begin to dissolve, and love becomes natural, effortless. The Buddha's teaching of Vian was never meant to be cold or detached. It was the deepest expression of love. By freeing us from the illusion of separation, it opens the heart to boundless compassion. The awakened mind does not cling to identity, yet it responds to the world with perfect care. It moves not from self-interest, but from understanding. This is why the Buddha could walk among all beings with peace. He had no need to defend himself, because he saw there was no self to defend. His compassion was vast, because it came from seeing unity, not division. In the light of this teaching, even death loses its terror. The self fears death because it believes it is a fixed thing that will end. But when we see that there is no fixed self, we understand that what we call death is merely transformation. The body returns to the earth, consciousness returns to the vastness of awareness, and life continues in countless forms. The wave may vanish, but the ocean remains. To realize Vian is to rest in that ocean without fear. Yet the path to this realization requires courage and patience. The ego does not dissolve easily. It resists every attempt to see through it because it depends on ignorance for its survival. It will even use spiritual teachings to strengthen itself, saying, "I understand non-self better than others," or "I am closer to enlightenment." This subtle pride is still attachment to the illusion of identity. The Buddha warned against such traps. True understanding is marked not by pride but by humility, by the quiet peace of one who no longer needs to be anyone. The practice of seeing Vô is simple but profound. It begins by observing the impermanence of all phenomena. Notice how thoughts appear and disappear, how emotions rise and fall, how sensations shift and dissolve. Each moment, the world renews itself completely. The self, which seems so solid, is merely a label placed on this ever-changing flow. When we stop identifying with it, we begin to taste freedom. We see that pain is not personal, that fear and joy are movements of the same life energy. Awareness watches them all without clinging. In that watching, the illusion of self slowly fades. This is the wisdom that brings peace. When the Buddha shared this insight with his disciples, many could not accept it. They asked, if there is no self, who practices, who attains enlightenment? The Buddha smiled and said that the question itself arises from misunderstanding. Just as fire burns by the nature of heat, awakening happens by the nature of awareness. There is no separate doer. The path unfolds naturally when conditions are right. This teaching invites a radical shift in perception. Instead of striving to become enlightened, we allow enlightenment to reveal itself when we stop clinging. The self cannot awaken because it is the illusion that hides awakening. When it drops away, awakening is what remains. The beauty of this realization is that it does not require belief or dogma. It only requires seeing clearly. Every breath, every thought, every experience can become a doorway to this seeing. When we observe without judgment, when we release the constant commentary of the ego, the truth of Vô begins to shine. It is not distant or mystical. It is the simplest thing in the world, the fact that everything changes, that nothing stands alone. In this understanding, gratitude blossoms. We begin to see life as a gift, not something to possess or control. The mind grows quieter, the heart softer. Even amidst challenges, there is peace, because there is no one left to struggle against what is. The Buddha's realization of Vô was not an escape from the world, but a full embrace of it. He walked, ate, taught, and smiled with the same awareness that saw through all illusions. His presence was peaceful because he no longer carried the burden of I. That is the invitation of this teaching, to live as awareness itself, free from the tyranny of identity. To wake each morning not as someone trying to become, but as consciousness unfolding naturally. When we begin to see life this way, the ordinary becomes sacred. Each sound, each face, each breath reveals the interconnected miracle of existence. We no longer ask what we can gain from life, because we realize we are life. To live in awareness of Vô is to live without fear, without clinging, without the endless need to define ourselves. It is the return to simplicity, to being what we have always been: pure, open, alive. The Buddha called this state Nibbana, the extinction of the fires of greed, hatred, and delusion. It is not annihilation, but peace, the cooling of all grasping. When the illusion of self ends, suffering ends. What remains is clarity, compassion, and freedom. This is the heart of Dharma, the invitation to awaken from the dream of I, and to rest in the truth that has no name. To recognize the impermanence of the self is to begin seeing through the dream of separateness. Yet this realization unfolds slowly, like dawn spreading over a dark landscape. At first, the mind resists, clinging to its familiar shapes. But as awareness deepens, a gentle understanding begins to bloom, the sense that everything, including what we call I, is in constant motion. Every breath marks both an ending and a beginning. Every thought arises and vanishes like a ripple on water. The Buddha's insight into the impermanence of the self is not meant to strip life of meaning, but to restore its sacredness. When we see that nothing lasts, we also see that every moment is infinitely precious. The beauty of impermanence lies in its tenderness. It invites us to love deeply without possession, to act kindly without expectation, to live fully without fear. The self we guard so fiercely is a shifting pattern, a collection of memories and sensations that we keep reassembling. One moment we are confident, the next we are doubtful. One moment loving, the next resentful. Each mood, each reaction, each story changes as quickly as clouds drift across the sky. Yet we build our entire identity on these passing formations, believing them to be solid. When the Buddha taught impermanence, he was pointing directly to this error. He saw that suffering arises because we cling to what cannot stay. The body changes, relationships evolve, possessions fade, and the mind itself transforms constantly. Still, the ego insists, I must hold on, as if holding could stop the tide. But the more we grasp, the more we suffer. To recognize impermanence is to stop fighting the river of life and to float with it instead. This is not passive surrender, but profound wisdom. It is the courage to see things as they are, not as we wish them to be. The illusion of a permanent self blinds us to the miracle of change. We treat each transformation as a threat instead of a gift, because we identify with form rather than with the awareness that perceives it. But when we begin to notice the changing nature of all phenomena, something subtle shifts. We realize that we are not the form but the seeing, not the thought but the knowing. The self we thought was fixed becomes transparent, and behind it shines an unchanging stillness. This stillness is not an object, but the space in which all objects appear. It is not something we can grasp or define, because it has no boundary. It is awareness itself, limitless, silent, free. The recognition of impermanence leads us there naturally, as we release attachment to everything that moves and rest in what remains unmoved. Yet the journey is not easy, because the ego interprets impermanence as loss. It mourns every change, believing that something essential is being taken away. In truth, nothing is taken, because nothing was ever owned. Everything we experience is borrowed from the universe, the breath, the heartbeat, the warmth of the sun. Even the sense of me. They come and go according to conditions. And when we align with that flow, we discover peace. The Buddha described this understanding as like watching a candle flame. The light seems steady, yet it is a continuous process of arising and ceasing. So too is life, so too is consciousness. There is continuity, but no fixed entity. The same flame burns, yet not a single particle of it remains from moment to moment. Seeing this, we stop clinging. We begin to live with a soft heart, open to change. Impermanence becomes our teacher, showing us the futility of attachment and the beauty of letting go. Every falling leaf, every passing season, every wrinkle on the skin whispers the same truth. Nothing stays, and that is why everything shines. When we resist impermanence, we live in tension. The mind tries to freeze time, to preserve youth, success, or love, and this creates suffering. But when we embrace impermanence, we live in harmony with the universe. Change no longer threatens us. It becomes a song we can dance to. We see that life's fragility is not a flaw, but its very essence. The flower blooms precisely because it will fade. The sunrise is beautiful because it will soon set. Even sorrow holds a secret radiance when we no longer fight its presence. In every ending, there is an opening, and in every death, the seed of renewal. This understanding does not make us indifferent. It makes us fully alive. We begin to savor existence moment by moment, without clinging to what has passed or fearing what will come. Awareness becomes our anchor, not identity. The Buddha's wisdom of impermanence also teaches humility. We realize that everything we take pride in, our knowledge, achievements, possessions, will eventually dissolve. Nothing we own, not even our body or name, truly belongs to us. This is not a tragedy, but liberation. When we accept that nothing is ours, we are free to appreciate everything. Gratitude arises naturally because every breath is recognized as a gift. The more we see impermanence, the less we demand from life. We stop trying to make it conform to our desires and instead open to its mystery. This is the birth of peace. In meditation, this truth becomes clear. As we watch the mind, we see thoughts appear and vanish, emotions rise and fall. The watcher remains unchanged. Slowly, we begin to understand that we are the witnessing itself, not what is witnessed. That witnessing is timeless, boundless, untouched by change. It is the still point around which the universe dances. The Buddha called this realization the deathless, because it is beyond birth and death. When we rest in that awareness, the fear of impermanence disappears. Change continues, but we are no longer tossed by it. We flow with it as wind flows through trees. To live with this understanding is to live in harmony with truth. We still act, love, create, and care, but we do so without grasping. Joy and sorrow come and go, but the heart remains open. Impermanence ceases to be a source of anxiety and becomes the rhythm of our awakening. Every loss becomes a teacher, every change a reminder to return to presence. In this way, impermanence leads us deeper into compassion. When we see that everything is fleeting, we become gentler with ourselves and others. We forgive more easily, knowing that anger and pride are as temporary as clouds. We love more fully, knowing that every encounter is unique and will never repeat. We stop wasting life in resistance and begin to live with grace. This is the true power of impermanence. It transforms fear into appreciation, attachment into freedom. The self that once feared change begins to dissolve into the vastness of being. It no longer needs to control or define, because it trusts the flow of life. This trust is not blind faith, but direct knowing, born from seeing the nature of all things. When we live this way, even suffering becomes a doorway to wisdom. Pain reveals impermanence. Loss points to the unchanging awareness beneath all experience. The mind softens, the heart opens, and we begin to taste the freedom the Buddha spoke of, not freedom from life, but freedom within it. Every moment becomes sacred, every breath an expression of awakening. To see the impermanence of the self is to step out of the prison of time. The past no longer defines us, and the future no longer frightens us. We live in the eternal now, where everything arises and passes in perfect order. The illusion of control fades, and in its place blooms a quiet trust. This trust is the foundation of enlightenment, the faith that life itself is complete as it is. The Buddha's smile, serene and compassionate, is the reflection of this understanding. He saw that there is nothing to cling to and nothing to fear. The self is a story told by changing conditions, and when the story ends, awareness remains, luminous and free. That awareness is not personal, yet it is more intimate than anything we can imagine. It is the heart of all things. the silent witness of every birth and death. To live from that awareness is to live as truth itself, unafraid, awake. The journey of letting go of the self is not a sudden act, but a gradual unfolding, like a flower opening to the sun after a long night. It requires patience, courage, and gentleness, because the illusion of self is woven into every layer of perception. To loosen its grip is to question everything we have believed about who we are. The process begins with awareness, with noticing how often the mind says I, how every thought and feeling revolves around this invisible center. The I claims ownership of everything it touches, my body, my thoughts, my success, my suffering, and in doing so, it builds the prison walls of identity. The path of liberation is the slow dismantling of these walls. It is not about destroying the ego, but about seeing through it, recognizing it as a temporary construct rather than the essence of being. The Buddha taught that clinging to self is the root of suffering, but he also taught that freedom lies in the middle way, not in repression, not in indulgence, but in clear understanding. When we observe the self without judgment, its power begins to fade. Each time we notice a thought saying, I want, I fear, or I need, we can pause and ask, who is this I? Is it the body, which changes moment to moment? Is it the mind, which never stops shifting? The more we inquire, the less solid the self becomes. It starts to feel transparent, a pattern of energy moving through awareness rather than an entity in control. This realization can feel disorienting at first, as if the ground beneath us is dissolving. But what actually dissolves is illusion, not truth. Beneath the shifting stories of self lies a vast stillness, a quiet presence that does not come or go. That presence is who we truly are. To live from this awareness is to act without the heavy burden of me. It does not mean becoming passive or indifferent. It means allowing life to move through us naturally, without resistance. Actions arise, words are spoken, feelings pass all, without the need for a doer. This is the freedom of letting go. It is not about losing control, but about realizing that control was never real to begin with. The ego believes it is steering the ship of life, but in truth, it is just a wave carried by the ocean. When we see this clearly, the struggle ends. Life continues, but it flows effortlessly, like a leaf floating on water. Letting go of the self also means letting go of the need for certainty. The mind craves definitions. It wants to know who we are, what will happen, what others think. But awakening requires stepping into the unknown, trusting the mystery of existence. The Buddha described this as walking through fire and discovering that the fire was never real. When we stop clinging to fixed identities, we begin to see how vast we truly are. We are not confined to a single story, not limited by past experiences or future fears. The self contracts around labels and memories, but awareness is infinite. It contains all possibilities. Each time we release attachment to an image of ourselves, we make space for truth to reveal itself. The practice of letting go is not done through force, but through surrender. Force belongs to the ego. Surrender belongs to wisdom. Surrender does not mean giving up. It means yielding to what is. When we stop fighting reality, peace arises naturally. This surrender can happen in small moments. When we forgive someone instead of holding resentment. When we accept change instead of resisting it. When we allow pain to be felt instead of pushing it away. Every act of acceptance weakens the illusion of self. Slowly we realize that what we thought was mine never truly belonged to anyone. Even thoughts and emotions come and go on their own. We do not create them, we witness them. In deep meditation, this becomes crystal clear. The sense of I fades into silence, and what remains is pure awareness, awake, vast, and free. At first, this silence can feel like emptiness, but it is a living emptiness, full of peace and clarity. The mind that feared dissolution discovers that what it is dissolving into is love. The heart opens, and compassion flows without effort. When the self drops away, we no longer see others as separate. Their joy and pain are our own, not metaphorically but literally, because the boundary between self and other was only a thought. From this understanding arises true kindness, not as an ideal but as a natural expression of oneness. The Buddha lived from this awareness, walking the earth without attachment, responding to suffering with infinite patience. He did not act out of obligation but out of understanding. He had let go of the self completely, and in doing so he became the embodiment of compassion. We too can walk this path, step by step, by letting go of what we are not. Each time we release a judgment, a fear, a desire, we make space for stillness. Each time we let go of the need to be right or important, we return to simplicity. The journey of letting go is like peeling layers from an ununleashed belief. Each identity reveals another beneath it, until finally there is nothing left to hold. But that nothingness is not void. It is fullness. It is the clear sky that was always there behind the clouds. When we rest in that space, we find that life still happens beautifully. We still love, create, work, and play, but without the constant tension of self-concern. We are no longer driven by fear or craving, but guided by presence. This is what the Buddha meant by living awakened in the world. The self that once demanded attention becomes quiet, like a child finally at peace. There is no need to fix or perfect anything, because nothing is missing. Letting go also means accepting imperfection. The ego seeks to control not only its image but the world around it, wanting everything to conform to its desires. But the more we try to perfect life, the farther we move from it. Life does not need perfection. It needs openness. To let go of the self is to allow life to be exactly as it is. Pain and joy, gain and loss, birth and death all are expressions of the same dance. When we stop dividing them into good and bad, we begin to see their unity. Every moment becomes sacred because it is free from comparison. This is why awakened beings radiate serenity. They no longer struggle with what is. They have surrendered to the truth of change. The self that once resisted everything has vanished like a shadow in sunlight. Yet life goes on, vibrant and intimate. The great irony of the path is that what we fear losing was never real, and what we discover in its place was never absent. The awareness that witnesses the rise and fall of all things has always been here, waiting quietly behind the noise. To recognize it is to come home. The mind may still create thoughts of I and mine, but we no longer believe them. They are seen as waves in the ocean of consciousness, momentary patterns of energy with no substance. We let them arise and pass without attachment, knowing that the ocean is never disturbed by its waves. The more we rest in this awareness, the more natural letting go becomes. It is no longer a practice but a way of being. The heart expands beyond the boundaries of personality, embracing the whole of existence. Compassion, wisdom, and peace flow effortlessly because there is no one left to block them. The Buddha called this freedom nirvana, the extinguishing of the fires of grasping and aversion. It is not a state to reach, but the natural condition of a mind free from illusion. When the self is seen for what it is, temporary mirage, the struggle ends. We return to the simplicity of being, to the quiet joy of awareness itself. In this space, life becomes meditation. Every breath, every step, every sound is a reminder of the miracle of existence. There is nothing to attain because everything has already been given. The journey of letting go leads us not away from life, but deeper into it. We begin to see that every moment is both the path and the destination. The Buddha's teaching is not an escape from the world, but an invitation to see it clearly, to see through the veil of self and find the boundless freedom that was always here. When we live this truth, we no longer fear change or loss, because we have discovered the changeless within change. The I that struggled to survive has melted into the vastness of being, and what remains is peace beyond description. Freedom is not something that can be given or taken away. It is the natural state of being that reveals itself when the illusion of self dissolves. The Buddha's teaching on Vienneng was never meant to create emptiness in a nihilistic sense, but to show us that the absence of a fixed identity opens the door to the deepest kind of liberation. When we realize that there is no permanent self to defend, no me to protect or prove, the mind becomes light, unburdened, expansive. This is the freedom of non-attachment, the freedom that arises not from possession but from letting go. In this freedom, there is no longer a division between inner and outer, between self and world. Life simply moves through us, as it always has, but now there is no resistance. Every sound, every breath, every sensation becomes part of a seamless dance. The walls of identity that once confined us begin to dissolve, and with them, the boundaries of fear. Fear only exists when there is something to lose, but when there is no self, there is nothing to lose. The mind that once sought safety and control now rests in openness. The heart that once closed itself in self-protection now expands naturally, embracing everything. This is not a theoretical freedom. It is a living experience that touches every part of life. It transforms how we love, how we work, how we meet suffering. To live in Vienneng is to live without friction. Things still happen, pain, joy, success, loss, but they no longer define us. The events of life pass through awareness like wind through bamboo. Nothing sticks, nothing wounds. The mind is no longer a battlefield of desire and fear, but a mirror reflecting reality as it is. In this mirror, everything shines with its own perfection. When the self disappears, what remains is not nothingness, but vastness and infinite field of presence, where everything is interconnected. This is the freedom the Buddha spoke of, the peace beyond conditions. It cannot be found by chasing experiences or ideas. It reveals itself only when grasping stops. Imagine standing by a still lake at dawn. When the water is agitated, the reflection is distorted. But when the surface becomes calm, the entire sky appears within it. Our mind is like that lake. When the waves of craving, fear, and self-concern settle, we begin to reflect the truth of existence clearly. Freedom is not something we create. It is what we discover when the storm subsides. The Buddha's path was not one of withdrawal from life, but of deep intimacy with it. He did not escape the world. He saw through it. To live with the understanding of Vienneng is to live fully awake, present with everything, yet bound by nothing. Every moment becomes an expression of freedom, even the simplest acts, walking, breathing, listening. The ordinary becomes sacred because it is seen without the filter of self. The mind no longer divides experience into good and bad, success and failure, mine and yours. It rests in equanimity, seeing all things arise and pass with gentle clarity. This is true serenity, not indifference, but total acceptance. When the self no longer claims ownership, life's natural intelligence begins to move through us effortlessly. Creativity flows without anxiety, compassion arises without effort, and wisdom manifests without calculation. The burden of "what should I do?" disappears because the question itself belongs to the illusion of self. In freedom, action becomes spontaneous and pure. There is no conflict between intention and reality. Life acts through us as wind moves through trees. This is the heart of Dharma, the natural alignment of being with truth. The freedom of non-self also changes how we experience love. Ordinary love is often rooted in attachment. We love those who affirm our identity, who make us feel secure, who reflect the image we want to see. But such love is fragile, dependent on conditions. When the illusion of self falls away, love becomes unconditional because it no longer arises from need. It is no longer personal but universal, a radiance of the awakened heart. We love not because someone belongs to us, but because everything belongs to itself. This love does not cling, does not possess, does not fear loss. It simply flows, endless as light. In this freedom, relationships become sanctuaries of truth rather than prisons of expectation. We no longer demand that others complete us, because we see that wholeness was never missing. The Buddha's compassion came from this boundless love and understanding that every being suffers because they are caught in the same illusion of self. When we see this, judgment disappears, replaced by empathy. We help others not to be virtuous, but because their pain is our pain. The boundaries between self and other vanish, and what remains is oneness, expressing itself through infinite forms. To live in this awareness is to live without conflict. The constant struggle to become someone better, to achieve more, to be seen and remembered, all of it fades like mist. In its place, there is quiet contentment. The mind stops chasing what it already is. The Buddha compared this state to laying down a heavy burden after carrying it for lifetimes. The relief is indescribable. We realize that nothing needs to be added or removed for freedom to exist. It is here now, in this breath, in this very awareness, reading these words. Yet the ego will continue to whisper that freedom lies elsewhere, in future achievements, in special states, in perfection. This whisper is the last illusion. The truth is that awakening is not an event. It is the recognition that nothing needs to happen. The freedom of Viennang is timeless. It has no beginning and no end because it is not something we become, it is what we have always been. What keeps us from seeing it is the veil of clinging, the identification with thought. Once that veil drops, even for a moment, we glimpse what the Buddha called the deathless, the awareness that is never born and never dies. To live from that awareness is to live without fear. Even death loses its meaning, because we see that what dies was never truly alive in the way we imagined. The body passes, the mind dissolves, but the space of awareness remains untouched. This is not belief, but direct knowing, as intimate as breath. In this freedom, gratitude becomes our natural language. We no longer take existence for granted because we see its impermanence. Each sunrise, each sound of rain, each human face becomes a miracle. Life is no longer something to control, but something to bow to. Even pain becomes sacred, for it too arises from the same mysterious source. Nothing is outside of awareness. Therefore, nothing is excluded from love. This understanding transforms suffering into compassion and uncertainty into wonder. The Buddha's life after enlightenment was a living testament to this truth. He ate when hungry, slept when tired, walked, smiled, and taught. Yet there was no self behind these actions, only awareness responding to the needs of the moment. This is what it means to be truly free, to live without the burden of self-centeredness, to allow life to express itself through us without interference. We can live this way too, here and now. Freedom is not reserved for sages. It is the birthright of every being who dares to look deeply. To begin, we only need to pause and observe the flow of experience without claiming it. Notice a thought arise and pass. Notice a feeling swell and fade. Notice the body breathes itself without effort. Who is doing this? The question points directly to the truth. No one. Life lives itself. The recognition of this fact is awakening. It is not dramatic or mystical. It is simple, immediate, and peaceful. From this place, everything changes while nothing changes. We still play our roles, fulfill responsibilities, love and grieve, but we do so lightly. We know that the play is not the actor. The freedom of non-self allows us to live fully engaged in the world, yet untouched by it. We become like the sky, open, vast, unbound, holding every storm without being moved. To taste this freedom, even for a second, is to know that all searching can end. The rest of life becomes an unfolding of that knowing, a deepening into what has always been true. The Buddha did not teach a doctrine. He pointed to a direct experience. Vieneng is not a philosophy, but a way of seeing. When the seeing is clear, freedom is inevitable. No one can grant it, and no one can lose it. It is not something we possess. It is what we are when possession ends. To live in this realization is to live beyond suffering, beyond fear, beyond the endless hunger of becoming. It is to rest as the silence before and after every thought, the stillness within every motion, the peace that has never left us. This is the freedom of Vieneng, the freedom that is not found but remembered. Living the truth of Vieneng in daily life is the most subtle and beautiful expression of awakening, because it transforms the ordinary into the sacred. The concept of non-self may seem distant when we are sitting in meditation or reading the words of the Buddha, but its true power reveals itself in the simplest acts, in how we speak, listen, eat, work, and love. Every moment becomes a chance to remember that there is no fixed I behind our experiences, only awareness unfolding. This understanding does not remove us from the world. It makes us more intimate with it. When we see through the illusion of self, we stop acting from fear or craving, and life begins to flow naturally. The boundaries that once defined our existence start to dissolve, and compassion becomes as effortless as breathing. Living without a solid self does not mean losing personality or emotion. It means being free from identification. We still smile, we still feel sadness, but we no longer say, "This defines me." Emotions arise and pass, just like weather moving through the sky. We can enjoy the sunlight of joy and endure the storms of grief without clinging to either. The Buddha's teaching of non-self does not strip us of humanity. It perfects it. When we no longer act out of ego, love becomes pure, work becomes service, and pain becomes wisdom. Life becomes simple again, like the quiet rhythm of waves on the shore. The daily practice of Vieneng begins with mindfulness, being attention to the flow of experience without labeling or ownership. When eating, we taste without the story of I like or I dislike. When walking, we feel the body move without saying I am walking. The world becomes alive with direct experience, no longer filtered through concepts. This is the beauty of living awake. Everything becomes fresh, immediate, and sacred. The sound of rain, the warmth of tea, the laughter of a child all are recognized as the dance of impermanence. Nothing is mundane when the self is absent. To live without self is also to live without constant judgment. The mind that sees everything as good for me or bad for me begins to rest. There is still discernment, but it is free from bias. Life unfolds according to causes and conditions. We respond rather than react. This responsiveness is the essence of wisdom. When we stop imposing the self onto reality, reality becomes our teacher. Every situation reveals something about the nature of mind. Anger, for example, shows us attachment. Fear shows us clinging. Pride shows us ignorance. When we see these emotions clearly, they lose their power. They no longer define who we are, because we know there is no who to be defined. This insight creates space in the heart, and within that space, compassion naturally arises. We begin to see others not as separate individuals competing for survival, but as expressions of the same life energy. The driver in traffic, the stranger on the street, the friend who disappoints us, they are all caught in the same illusion of self, struggling with the same longing for peace. When we understand this deeply, judgment gives way to kindness. We speak gently, listen patiently, and forgive easily. Compassion becomes our natural state because we no longer draw a line between me and them. The freedom of non-self also transforms how we work and create. Most of our anxiety comes from the belief that our worth depends on success or recognition. When we see that there is no permanent self to succeed or fail, we can act with clarity and joy. We do our best because it is natural to express excellence, not because we need validation. The artist paints not to become famous, but because creativity is life expressing itself. The teacher teaches not to gain praise, but because wisdom wants to share itself. This way of living is effortless, flowing, and free. Even when difficulties arise, they no longer cause despair. The mind understands that challenges are not punishments, but conditions through which growth happens. Everything becomes part of the path. Every mistake becomes a lesson in humility. Every loss, a reminder of impermanence. There is no longer a constant struggle to control outcomes because we see that outcomes are not ours to control. We learn to trust the unfolding of life. This trust is the fruit of understanding non-self. It is not passive resignation, but active acceptance, the willingness to meet life as it is. The Buddha described this as the middle way, a balance between effort and surrender. When we live in this balance, we find harmony in every circumstance. The noise of the world no longer disturbs us because the silence of awareness is always present beneath it. To live without self also changes how we experience relationships. In ego-based relationships, we often seek to possess or be possessed, to gain comfort, to affirm our worth through another. But such love is fragile because it depends on conditions. When the illusion of self fades, love becomes selfless. It does not demand, it gives, it does not hold. It lets be. We see that true connection arises not from attachment, but from freedom. Two beings free from self can love completely without fear, because their love is not about filling a void, but celebrating wholeness. This love is the living expression of Vian Eng. It mirrors the compassion of the Buddha, who saw all beings as reflections of the same light. Even conflict becomes an opportunity to deepen understanding. When anger arises, we do not say, "You hurt me." We see it as an energy moving through both minds, arising from ignorance, dissolving in awareness. This view changes everything. It ends the cycle of blame and opens the door to reconciliation. Peace in the world begins with peace in this understanding. The practice of Vienneng also brings deep gratitude. When we realize that nothing belongs to us, not even this breath, we begin to appreciate everything. Gratitude is the natural perfume of non-attachment. It fills the heart with quiet joy. Each sunrise, each encounter, each breath becomes a gift. We no longer live in the illusion of scarcity because we see that abundance is already here. The self was always the thief of gratitude, constantly saying, "I need more." When the self disappears, only wonder remains. This wonder is not naive. It is clarity. It sees that even sorrow is part of the great dance of life. When we suffer, we no longer ask, "Why me?" We see that pain is simply the play of causes and conditions, like a wave rising and falling. It hurts, but it no longer imprisons. We hold it gently until it passes, and in its passing we glimpse the unshakable peace beneath all movement. This is what it means to live the Dharma, not to escape the world, but to meet it fully with an open heart. The understanding of non-self does not make us detached robots. It makes us deeply human. We laugh, cry, and love more freely because we are no longer confined by fear. We can face death without trembling because we know it is only another transformation. The body will fall, but awareness will not. The I that feared dying was never real. What remains is life eternal, beyond form. Living from this realization does not mean abandoning responsibility. On the contrary, it deepens our care for the world. When there is no self, everything becomes self, and compassion extends naturally to all beings. We care for the earth because it is our body. We care for others because they are our own heart. This sense of unity gives meaning to action. The awakened life is not withdrawal. It is engagement without attachment. It is action guided by wisdom, rooted in stillness. Each moment becomes an opportunity to express love in form, feeding the hungry, speaking truth, offering kindness. The smallest act done in awareness carries the fragrance of awakening. To live the end in daily life is to live as the Buddha did, not as a saint separate from the world, but as one who walks gently within it. He ate when hungry, rested when tired, taught when asked, and remained silent when not. Every gesture, every word was aligned with truth. We too can live this way. It begins with mindfulness, deepens through compassion, and matures in wisdom. Slowly, the line between meditation and life disappears until every moment is meditation. Washing dishes, driving, talking, all become part of the same practice. There is no separation between spiritual life and ordinary life because all of it is the unfolding of awareness. The self used to make divisions, sacred and profane, good and bad, success and failure, but these divisions dissolve in the light of Vienneng. Everything is seen as the same expression of the infinite. In this realization, peace is constant. It is not dependent on circumstance because it comes from seeing clearly. The world continues to change, but within us there is unchanging stillness. That stillness is not cold or empty. It is alive with love. It is the quiet smile of the Buddha reflected in every heart. To live this truth is to end the war within and without. The search ends because what we were seeking was never elsewhere. Freedom is not a destination. It is the nature of being itself. When we live without self, we live as life itself, free, compassionate, luminous, and whole. When the mind finally rests in the understanding of V and Eng, there is a sense of completion that cannot be described in words, a stillness that feels both infinite and intimate. It is the silence after the long storm of becoming, the peace that remains when the striving to be someone has ended. This is not an escape from life, but the deepest immersion in it. Because for the first time we see things as they truly are, fluid, connected, radiant, without owner. In the light of this seeing, the old boundaries fade away. There is no inside or outside, no birth or death, no gain or loss. The entire universe breathes as one living organism, and we are not apart from it. The self that once stood like a wall between us and reality has dissolved, revealing the seamlessness of existence. To live from this understanding is to move through the world like the wind, present everywhere, belonging nowhere, touching all things, yet clinging to none. Every action arises spontaneously from wisdom rather than desire. Every word carries the fragrance of peace. When there is no self, there is no conflict, because there is no one left to defend or attack. The world continues to change, but it no longer disturbs the heart. The mind becomes like a vast sky, where clouds of thought and emotion drift freely without obscuring the openness beneath. This is what the Buddha meant when he spoke of the unconditioned, the state beyond birth and death. It is not somewhere else or sometime later. It is right here, hidden beneath the noise of the ego. When the noise stops, the truth shines by itself. To live in the awareness of non-self is to live in constant gratitude. We no longer take life for granted because we see it as a gift appearing moment by moment. The breath that enters is not ours. The breath that leaves is not ours. Yet in this letting go there is joy, because every breath is perfect in its impermanence. The heart becomes tender, open to both pleasure and pain, knowing that neither can stay. The wisdom of Vieneng does not remove, feeling it deepens it. We feel more, not less, because there is no wall of self to filter experience. Sorrow is no longer an enemy but a wave of life passing through. Joy is no longer a possession but a shared vibration of being. In this vast openness, compassion becomes effortless. The pain of others moves us naturally because there is no longer an other. The line between self and world, between I and you, dissolves in the light of awareness. Helping another becomes as instinctive as healing one's own wound. This is the compassionate heart of enlightenment, the love that has no object, the love that simply is. The Buddha's smile in ancient statues is the reflection of this lover smile, born not from pleasure but from peace. It is the smile of one who has awakened from the dream of separation. When we see through that dream, we realize that the entire struggle of humanity, the wars, the greed, the loneliness, comes from the belief in self. Every act of violence is an attempt to defend an illusion. Every craving is a search for permanence in what cannot last. To awaken is to end that struggle within oneself and, by doing so, to bring peace into the world. Each awakened being becomes a light for others, not through preaching but through presence. Their very existence radiates stillness, reminding others of their own true nature. Living in awareness of non-self also transforms our relationship with time. The mind of ego lives in the past and future, constantly replaying memories or imagining outcomes. But when the self dissolves, time loses its grip. we begin to live in the eternal now, the only moment that truly exists. This does not mean we stop planning or remembering. It means we no longer mistake those thoughts for reality. Life unfolds naturally, and we move with it, guided by intuition rather than control. This timeless awareness brings an ease that words cannot convey. Even in the midst of activity, there is stillness. Even in the face of uncertainty, there is trust. The freedom of non-self is not fragile. It is unshakable because it depends on nothing. The self was always conditional, built on approval, success, identity, but awareness is unconditional. It does not come or go. It was present before birth and will remain after death. This is the deathless that the Buddha spoke of, the peace beyond all opposites. To realize this is to lose the fear of death, because we see that there was never anyone to die. The body and mind are waves rising and falling, but the ocean of being remains. Death becomes just another change of form, no more tragic than a leaf falling from a tree. In fact, when the illusion of self fades, every moment of life becomes a celebration of impermanence. The fleeting nature of all things gives them beauty. A flower's fragility, a child's laughter, a sunset's glow, all are precious precisely because they do not last. The self wants to hold them, but awareness simply witnesses, allowing everything to be as it is. In that allowing, beauty deepens. Nothing needs to be different. Everything is already whole. To live this way is to live in harmony with the Dharma. The Buddha's teaching was never about escape, but about intimacy. He did not promise a heaven apart from the world, but revealed the heaven within it, hidden beneath the layers of attachment and fear. When those layers fall away, even the simplest act, drinking water, hearing a bird, feeling the wind, becomes a doorway to the infinite. The sacred is no longer confined to temples or scriptures. It is everywhere, because there is no separation left to divide it. The freedom of Viennang is the realization that there is nothing to attain because we have never been separate from truth. The seeking ends, not in despair but in fulfillment. The searcher disappears, and what remains is life itself, radiant and self. In that recognition, the heart bows to everything, to joy and sorrow, to birth and death, to the entire mystery of existence. Bowing is no longer an act of submission, but of reverence. It is the natural response of awareness, recognizing awareness in all forms. Even the idea of enlightenment fades, because enlightenment was only the seeing of what was always so. The Buddha's journey beneath the Bodhi tree ended not with an achievement, but with a smile of remembrance. He saw that there was nothing to gain, only the ending of ignorance. When ignorance ends, everything shines. To live in that light is to live as peace itself. It is not a peace that excludes the world, but one that embraces it completely. We walk, work, laugh, and love, but the core of being remains unmoved. Storms come and go, yet the sky of awareness stays clear. This is the freedom that cannot be taught, but only realized. It does not depend on effort, though effort prepares the way. It is revealed when effort ceases, when we stop trying to become and start being. Even the practice of meditation becomes effortless, because there is no one left to meditate, only awareness, aware of itself. In this state, everything we do is meditation. Every breath is prayer. Every silence is the sound of truth. The world continues to unfold, but we are no longer entangled in it. We participate fully yet remain free. This is the paradox of awakening. Complete involvement without attachment, complete love without possession. Such a life radiates joy not because it avoids suffering, but because it understands it. Suffering is no longer personal. It is simply the movement of life. When pain arises, it is met with compassion rather than resistance. When pleasure comes, it is enjoyed without clinging. This balance is what the Buddha called the middle way, harmony between emptiness and form, stillness and motion, being and doing. It is the realization that emptiness is not nothing but the space in which everything arises. The self was the only obstacle, the shadow cast by ignorance. When that shadow disappears, the light of awareness shines everywhere. Living from this light is to live as love, wisdom, and peace embodied. The Buddha's awakening was not unique to him. It is the potential of every being who dares to look beyond the illusion of I. This is the true purpose of life, not to accumulate, not to become, but to awaken. And awakening is not far away. It is the next breath, the next moment of pure presence, the quiet recognition that you were never separate from the universe you seek to understand. When the mind surrenders completely, life itself becomes the teacher. The trees, the rivers, the faces of strangers all speak the same truth. There is no self, only this infinite flow of being. To live from that truth is to be free beyond measure. There are no chains left to break, no goals left to chase. What remains is simplicity, clarity, and love. In the end, the teaching of Vô is not about philosophy, but about freedom. The freedom to live fully, to love without fear, to die without regret. It is the freedom of a mind that has stopped fighting itself, a heart that has stopped closing, a being that has stopped pretending to be separate. This is the great secret the Buddha offered to the world, that we are already free. That awakening is not something to gain, but something to remember. The door to freedom has never been locked. It opens the moment we stop clinging and step into the boundless presence that has always been here, quietly waiting beneath the illusion of I. To understand Vô is to awaken to the truth that freedom was never something to seek, but something we have always carried within us. The journey through illusion, suffering, fear, and attachment was never about reaching a distant goal. It was about peeling away everything that hides our true nature. The Buddha's teaching reveals that when we stop clinging to the story of I, what remains is infinite peace. There is no separation between self and world, no inside or outside, no beginning or end, only awareness flowing through the rhythm of life. To live in this truth is to breathe without fear, to love without conditions, to exist without the weight of becoming. The mind becomes light, the heart vast, and every moment sacred. Suffering dissolves not because the world changes, but because we stop fighting its impermanence. In the stillness of acceptance, we discover compassion that embraces all beings, even those still lost in illusion. Freedom is not found by running away from life, but by entering it fully, awake and unbound. When the illusion of self fades, life itself becomes meditation, a dance of presence, effortless and pure. This is the path the Buddha walked, and it is open to us all, right here, right now. As you rest tonight, let your breath be a reminder of that truth. Let the boundaries of me and mine soften and allow awareness to expand beyond the body, beyond thought, into the vast quiet that holds everything. There, in that silence, you are free. You are never separate, never lost, never broken. You are the stillness beneath all motion, the light behind every shadow, the peace that neither comes nor goes. If these words have touched something deep within you, let that awakening continue. Breathe, rest, and let go. Subscribe to Buddhism for sleep, and allow these gentle teachings to guide you back, night after night, to the boundless peace that is your true home.